Hilchis Mechirah Perek Arba V'Esrim. Hamoicher Shleisha Ilonis B'Teich Sodeo. Person sells someone 3 trees. Now, there's a Hechatimtza where you sell someone only trees, and the karka is yours, the tree is his. So as long as the tree is growing, so he has a right to use the tree. Once the tree stops growing, so he has no right to the karka. If he cuts off the tree, so he has no rights to the karka. He has only a right to the tree. Obviously, the tree is going to be yoinik from the karka, and that's what the owner sold, that you could have this tree as the tree is being yoinik from the karka. But on the other hand, once the tree is no longer there, you own nothing in the karka. That's the gather of owning a tree. Now, a person sells someone 3 trees, so they're going to learn that in certain situations, even though you only spoke about trees, but nevertheless, it's understood that those trees you also get with it a schus in the karka, which causes that even if the trees no longer be there, so you still have a right to the karka. That's this din. Hamoicher shleisha ilonis b'teich sodeh. Someone sells someone 3 fields. They were saplings, they were very small trees. Even there were 3 trees that really originally there were 3 branches, they came out of one tree, and then earth came, there was whichever way, the earth came and covered over like a certain part of the tree until it reached the place of the branches, and now those branches are really coming out of an original tree, but lapel, right now they're 3 separate trees. These 3 branches grew out of this tree, and now they became like 3 separate trees. They're growing, but even though they originally are growing out of the tree, that's the taich. There were small trees. They were actually 3 branches of one tree, but right now they're 3. So the din is, when a person buys 3 trees in someone else's field, even if they're very small trees, or even if they're trees that are originally branches out of one tree, nevertheless, they have karka which is appropriate for them, which we'll learn behemshech, what's called the karka roilem. So in other words, even though they only spoke about the trees, but it's self-understood that with the trees goes karka. And therefore, those trees dried out or they were cut off, is yeshli karka roilem. Because since originally we assume that with these 3 trees come karka, so Mela now, even if those trees are no longer here, so he still retains the karka. And besides that, since he also owns the karka, so any trees which are in between these 3 trees are also part of the deal. So in other words, even though we spoke about 3 trees, and we're talking about 3 very small trees, but nevertheless we understand that there's karka also. Karka haroilem goes together with the tree as part of the sale, and even trees that are in between the trees are also self-understood that it's part of the sale. But it's brought down that it's only very small trees that are in between these trees. Mashiach, if you have a big tree, which is like a shem b'fnei atzmei, so we wouldn't understand that that big tree would also be bottled to these 3 trees. But I'll call upon Nachmal. The din is that when a person sells someone 3 trees, so there's a chatimsa zulun behemshach, that even though we only spoke about trees, but he also is kind of the karka, which is royalahem, and he also has the ilonis, which are bineyam. Now, v'kama halacha beis v'kami hakarka royalem. What's the karka which is roy for these trees? So first of all, it's tachteyam, any karka which is under the trees, which means which is under the branches which extend from the trees, and also bineyam, the karka which is in between these 3 trees, and also v'chutzalahem, the karka which is outside these 3 trees. Kimloi ha'oira v'sali, how much? The amount of the person that's cutting from the tree, that's called the oira, the person that's cutting from the tree, and his basket, which is 2 amas. Those 2 amas outside the tree is also considered part of the karka, which is roi to the person that bought these trees. Neither of them are able to plant it. Only midas chaveri. So really, the kinyan that you have under the tree and in between the trees is much stronger than the kinyan that you have outside the trees. The kinyan that you have outside the trees is only that you have a right to prevent the owner from planting around that tree, because lepel, he's going to be preventing you from being able to harvest the fields, the trees, to cut off from the trees. So therefore, you have like rights to it, and that person also doesn't. You can go ahead and use the outside of the tree, let's say, to plant over there, Because again, the purpose of having the outside of the tree is only to be mishamish the tree. Mashaim, for you to go ahead and plant it, that doesn't have, you don't have that schusei shtamshus. But so memela, both of them could prevent each other from planting in that area. Masha'inkin under the tree and alderas are between the trees, that's mamish yours, and therefore even if there'll no longer be trees, that area will remain yours. So it's not really on the same madrega look here. Now so this din, so we have this din that even though we only spoke about trees, but since we're dealing with 3 trees, so therefore you kind of the karka haruya for these 3 trees, and the karka haruya is mashatachteim ubineim, and also chutzala kemlei ha'era v'sali, and kemlei ha'era v'sali is not mamish in the same madrega of kinyan like tachteim ubineim. Now b'medvarim amurim that by 3 trees you have a schus also in the karka is kshahayu shleisha hilanus aimdem kmei shleisha pitputi kira. So in other words, they're standing like 3 legs of a kira, which means they're standing like a segel. In other words, there's 2, one against each other, and then there's a third that come down in between. Shleisha pitputi kira, like the 3 little legs of a kira. Sheshefsim aleim saketera, which you put a pot on it. So you have like a tripod. You have like something. You have three trees, and one of them is in the middle, which is two trees against each other, and one in the middle like a segel. Shareim shnaim k'negezev ashlishi mechuvin b'nei meruchik ben. So in such a case, we say that there's 3 trees, and those 3 trees create like a triangle, and then that area which is in between the 3 trees and that's under the 3 trees belong to the person that owns the trees. And also, v'hu sheyeh ben kol ilon ve'ilon me'arba ames vat shesh. So in other words, the minimum shear between the trees should be 4 ames, and the maximum should be 16 ames. So if you have these 3 trees, and in between them is at least 4 ames and not more than 16 ames, and they're standing in such a shape of shleisha pitputi kira, which we're saying is like a segel, so then this din applies that you're kind of not only the trees, but you also kind of the karka under the trees and in between the trees, and also outside the trees. Now, what's the taich when you say 4 ames, or either 4 ames, the minimum 4 ames, or 16 ames? L'chorah, a tree is not, the width of the tree is not the same along the height of the tree. So he says, who made it? It's from the wide bottom of the tree. In other words, the tree starts, and on the bottom it's the widest. So when we say it has to be 4 ames, the minimum 4 ames, and alderas are the maximum 16 ames, so that's from this ikar harachav, from the wide ikar, the stump of the tree, which is the foundation of the tree. But if those trees weren't standing as shleisha pitputi kedera, they're not standing like a segel, they're standing, let's say, in a straight line, or a different way, or they were close to each other, less than 4 amas, that's so in such a case, it doesn't fit the criteria in order to be kind of the karka. You didn't buy all 3 trees at a time. You bought 1 tree and then another tree, or 2 trees and then a 3rd tree. He sold him 2 trees in his field, and the other one was on the boundary. It wasn't mamish in the field. It has to be in the field. He starts over the Ram Lashon B'duik and Ram B'teich Sodeu. It has to be B'teich Hasodem. Masha'inkin, if one is ala meitzer, so that's not included, because it's not regular to have really a tree ala meitzer. So therefore that's not included in this din of 3 trees, which includes karka. Oi, another situation, you have Shnayim B'teich Shalei, you have 2 trees, you sold them 3 trees together. And Lepel, it was all the tnoim. It was like a segel, it was like Shleisha Pitputi Kira, and it was more than 4 ames and less than 16 ames. But Lepel, he didn't own the area of all 3 trees. 2 trees were in his field, and the 3rd tree was a tree that he owned, which was in someone else's property. There were 2 trees that was in his property, and the other one was in someone else's property. Between these 3 trees, there was a ditch, a yamas hamayim, or a canal of water, channel of water, a rishus harabim, which was going b'neim. is therefore hareza ein lekarka. He doesn't have karka. Lefichach, since he doesn't have karka, is also lekana ilonis shebeneim. So he doesn't own the ilonis which are between the two trees because they have nothing to do with him. He only was kind of the three trees. He has nothing other than the three trees. And also, v'im yavish o ilon ein niktzaz. If the tree dries out or it gets cut off, is yelechle. So then he leaves because then he has no shaykhs to the karka in the tree. So nachamol, when a person buys three trees, so if the trees are standing like shleisha putekira, which is like a segel, and between the trees is the minimum 4 amas and the maximum 16 amas, so then the din is your koino also the karka shebineim, and also we're saying that the three trees are in his karka. Because there's not three trees that one of the trees is in someone else's karka. It's three trees b'seich sodeu, and also that it shouldn't be that one of the trees should be ala meitzer. It should be three trees actually b'teich sodeu, and also that he bought the three trees together. Not he bought two trees and then he bought another tree. So then we say that together with the trees, it's self-understood that together with the tree, he's also kind of the karka shebineim and the karka shetachteim, and also the dinam of what should be outside those trees. That's these dinam. And Mamela, he owns the karka, so therefore even if he loses the tree dries up, he cuts off the tree, he still owns the karka. Masha'enkin, in a case where he doesn't own the karka, and so he only owns the trees. So Mamela, once the karka, the tree is no longer there, either dried up or he cut it off. So then, from there onwards, so he has nothing in this karka because he never had anything in the karka. The only thing that had in the karka was the right that his tree should grow from this karka. Halacha hey, kol misha koine shleisha ilonis, and therefore v'yeshli karka, is im higdilu v'hitziu choiter yokutz. Kleshel yimayet haderech al balasod. And then here we're talking about that he owns the ilonis. He also owns the karka, which is under the ilonis and between the ilonis, as we learned before. Now, if branches start coming out of the tree towards the outside of the tree, in other words, let's say you have this segel in between, inside, the inside of that segel, that's his. Masha'inkin, outside of it, even though he's allowed to, there's maloi oir of asali, which you're not allowed to plant, the owner is not allowed to plant because he has to use it in order to cut the tree, but lapel, it's not his property like we said before. It's just that he has the right to prevent him from using that area. So now if his tree is like producing now shoots or branches that are coming out of the tree, so he's blocking the balasoda from walking around the tree. In other words, his branches are extending into the property of the original owner. So therefore he has to cut it off. All these branches and shoots, even if they're coming out of the roots, which when they come out of the roots, they have a din like they're coming out of the karka, is Arein Shabal Hilana Sharieshli Karka. He owns the karka which is under the tree. So any roots that are giving out these shoots, those shoots are his. But on the other hand, since they're growing in an area which he doesn't have the full balabatishkeit over it, he only has a right to use that area to cut from his tree, but it's not really his area. So therefore, the balabayas of the Sadr could insist that he cuts off these trees. This is the word that in Yigdil of Eitzil Chayter, which is outside this area, the outside of the inside of the trees. So then the owner of the field, which owns the entire field except for this little area or whatever the size of the area is, and he also has rights to that area outside, even though he can't plant it. So he could insist that you go ahead and cut off these shoots and these branches. That's the din when a person owns the karka and also the ilanas. That's why he has shleish ilanas. Halacha vav. Hakoina shnei ilanas b'teich sei chaverei. So eli karka. That's what we learned before. He has no karka. Lefichach imeso ilon niktzas. If the tree dies or the tree gets cut off, is eli klum. Now higdilu shnei ilanas. Let's say the two trees started becoming bigger, and veitziu srigim v'amirim, and they started taking out branches in whichever area, whichever direction. Before, when we were talking about the branches, we were talking about branches that are going outside the tree because they're going into the area that belongs to the balasada. But over here, even they're going inside. So the din is yakuts. You have to cut it off, even though those are yours because they're coming out of the tree. But you should cut it off. Why? Because shema yitzmuchu baretz. Maybe they'll start growing in the ground. Somehow, even though they're coming out of the tree, maybe they'll bend and there'll be earth going on top of it, And Mamela, it's going to look like it's coming out of the ground. And now, V'yema L'mecher, he's going to be able, the buyer of these two trees, which really only owns the trees, and he doesn't have any schus in the karka, he's going to turn around to the mecher and he's going to tie the shleisha ilonis machartali. You sold me shleisha ilonis v'yeshli karka. So therefore the mecher could insist, and that's the din, that the lekeach should go ahead and cut off these branches in order to make it clear that he only has two trees. Now, kola eitzim shekoitzes bal shlei ilonis mihem, those wood, the pieces of the tree, the branches that he's going to cut off, is it depends. Ha'olim and agzoim, something that's coming out from the trunk of the tree. There's the part of the tree which is above the earth, which is reya pnei achama, which the sun could see, that's not in the ground. So it's not the roots. Is arisho bali ilonis, that belongs to the bali ilonis, because he owns the tree, and Memele he also owns anything that grows from this tree. However, v'ha'ilim and asharoshim, something that's coming up from the roots of the tree, that's the part of the tree which is in the ground, that's called the roots. So then, because that's considered that it's coming from the ground, it's not coming from the tree. And as we said, the tree he owns, but the ground he doesn't own. Now this is the din by a normal tree. However, bitkolim, when we're talking about a palm tree, ein lebala dekel min oila klum, anything that will grow out of the actual palm tree from the side. In other words, the palm tree, b'chlal, the branches grow on top of the palm tree. They grow up on top of the palm tree. So those branches that grow on top of the palm tree belong to the person that owns the palm tree. Masha'inkin, if they're going to grow out from the side of the palm tree, even though the side of the palm tree is re'eh pnei achama, but it's not regular. The thing should grow from the side of a palm tree. They only grow from the top, or they grow from the roots. So therefore, so we say that bitkolim ein lebala dekel min ha'ila klum, he doesn't get anything from what grows out of the dekel, from the side of the dekel. He doesn't have that gezer, knows he doesn't have a trunk which produces branches. He has only, the palm tree goes up very high, and then on top of the palm tree there's what grows out of the top of the palm tree and the dates. Masha'inki, that there should be branches coming out of the side of the dekel, that's not regular, and therefore the das of the koina wasn't that he should own those branches. Halacha ches, hamoicher karka, someone sells karka, v'shir ilonis. So till now we were talking about that he was selling ilonis. The question is, does he sell 3 trees, or does he sell 2 trees? Is he selling with the karka or without the karka? Over here is fakert, he's selling the karka, and he's leaving over the trees for himself. Now, when a person sells trees, so even if he's not selling karka, so in the sale of the tree lies that person has a right that tree should grow in this karka. That's the taich, I'm selling you the tree. Masha'inkin, in a case where a person sells the karka and he leaves the tree for himself, so over here, in order for him to have a right that tree should grow in the field, he has to also leave himself karka. There's no messias. You have to understand why, maybe, to understand why there are difference. But this musig that I'm selling you a tree, and that the sale of the tree doesn't include karka, but it includes the right that this tree should grow in this karka, even without having karka. That's only when we're selling a tree. So selling a tree, you're saying, I'm selling you the tree plus the right to have this tree grow in this karka. As long as the tree is alive, it could grow in this karka. I can't stop you from that. But if it'll be fakert, you're selling the karka, and now you're leaving yourself the tree, so you're leaving yourself the tree, but the buyer of the karka can tell you, good, the tree is yours, take the tree. I never gave you the rights to have this tree in my field. So in order for you to retain the rights to keep the tree in your field, you have to also own the karka. You have to understand, why can't I just retain the rights to have this tree with the rights to grow it in the karka? But it doesn't work that way. You have to understand why. But that's l'chura the din. When I sell you a karka, even if I'm not selling you, when I sell you a tree rather, so even though I'm not selling you karka, but in the tree liegt that you could use the karka for it. Masha'inkin, if I'm selling you karka and I'm keeping the tree for myself, so in order for me to have the rights to use this karka for my tree, I have to keep karka for myself. And therefore we assume that when I sold you the field and I left the tree for myself, what I left was also the tree plus the karka. That's what the Rambam says here. Nochamal, halacha ches. Hamoicher karka, someone sells karka, v'shir ilonis. So the din is harei yeshli chatzi karka kul. Over here he has more They're just like we said before, under the trees and between the trees. Over here you have half of the karka. Who says he left karka for himself? L'churi, he sold the karka. He only left the trees for himself. So on that the Rambam continues, She'ilu le'shir bekarka. If he wouldn't have left any karka for himself, the lekech would be able to tell him, Akeri lancha. So you take away your tree. You have a tree, so take it away. So therefore, we understand that it's partial that he left himself karka. In other words, even though HaMecher buying Yofav Mecher, but he's not going to leave himself a tree and not be able to keep that tree in the karka. So therefore, we assume that he also took karka for himself, and then we assume that he left karka for himself half of the karka. V'cheinim shir shnei ilonis bulvad. This was talking about it was 3 ilonis. But if he left only 2 ilonis, so then yeshli karka haroyelem. He has the karka which is royelem, which is under them and between them, and mulei erev v'sali. She'ilu l'shir akarka lekeach emer le akein lilein chavelech. So therefore, we understand that even though he sold him the karka, and he only left himself ilonis, but he didn't leave himself ilonis al manas that the lekeach should be able to tell him aker ilon chavelech. He left himself ilonis ba'ifim kazeh, that he has the right to keep those ilonis in the karka. Why does he have the right? Because the karka is his. Because the karka is his. As we were saying before, when a person sells a tree, even though Lepel, you have no karka, Lepel, you have a right to keep that tree in the karka. That's part of the sale. Masha'enkin, when you leave the tree for yourself, in order for you to have a right to keep that tree there is only if you also own the karka. Halacha tes. Hamoicher is someone that sells the trees v'shir is a karka, so that is yesh lebali ilonis karka roilam k'mesha b'yana. That's what we learned before. Now, mocher is a karka, that's talking about when he's mocher is the ilonis, so we assume that a mecher ba'ayin yofa mecher, and therefore he's giving him also karka. That's the din. A mecher is ilonis, and shir is a karka, so the balak ilonis has the karka roilam, according to the tnoim that we learned till now. Now, mocher is a karka le'echod, v'se ilonis le'acher. He went ahead and sold the karka to one person, and the ilonis to another person. V'hir zigzeh ilonis, v'hir zigzeh karka. So the din is, now we say that zeh kone hilonis im chatzia karka, v'zeh shehir ze bekarka kone chatzia karka kabulvad. Just like when a person sells the karka and he leaves the ilonis for himself, so then if we don't say that he only has the kedei of the ilonis if it's more than two ilonis, but rather we say that he has chatzia karka. So over here also, when he's selling the karka to one person and the ilonis to the other person, we're not saying he's being very generous to the person he's selling the karka, and to the person he's selling the ilonis, he's only giving the ilonis and whatever under the ilonis and between the ilonis, but all the rest of the karka belongs to the person who sold the karka. But over here we assume that he sold the chatzi karka to the person he sold the karka to, and the chatzi karka to the person that he sold the ilonis to. Halacha yud. Ha'achin shecholku, 2 brothers divided the Yerusha. Echad nachal pardes, one took an orchard. Ve'echad notl steilov, and he took a field which you plant tvuin. Yesh l'bal pardes arba amas b'teich steiloven smuches l'seife ilonish shel pardes. It's self-understood that besides the orchard, he's also going to have a right for 4 amas into the field. Shalmanas ken cholko. This is the amanas ken because that's tzorich the aveda of the pardes. He has to plow around that field, and he also needs it to harvest the pardes. So b'kitzur, it's understood that lapel, besides the actual pardes itself, he also has 4 ramas outside the pardes. This is not something which has to be clearly spelled out. Everyone knows this. Halacha yudal. It had palm trees. And he told him, Chutz midekel pleni. He says, I'm selling you the field, but except for that particular dekel, that particular palm tree. Now, in dekel teva mishubachu, it's a very special palm tree, a very good palm tree. And he said, that palm tree I want. So then we understand that oisei adekel levad hu shashir. The only thing he's interested is in that palm tree. In other words, he's selling the whole field, but he doesn't want to part from that palm tree because that palm tree is a very special palm tree. And everything else belongs to the lekech. However, if there was a particular dekel that he mentioned, and it was actually not a special dekel, if I cared, it was not a good dekel, so then the pshat is he meant to say even that dekel I want to keep. In other words, I want to keep the tkolim, and I even want to keep this dekel which is an inferior dekel. So therefore we say, kolshken shishir ashar. So for sure he left over the other tkolim, and therefore leikonim and atkolim tklum. So we understand that the buyer wasn't koine anything from any of the tkolim. So again, if he specifies a certain dekel, that dekel is a special dekel, so we could assume that only that special dekel is he wants to exclude from the sale. But if that dekel isn't any special, on the contrary, it's an inferior dekel, so then we interpret his words to mean to say that even that dekel I want to retain. I don't want you to have any of the kolim. I even want to keep this dekel, which is an inferior dekel. Halacha Yud Beis. Machal Isa, the person sells someone a field, v'amalei chutz min ilanis, except for the trees. Now, im yesh beit kolim bilvad, if the only trees that it has are palm trees, is shirat kolim. And al deraz of im yesh beit kfanim bilvad, if it only has vines, it has only for grapes, a vineyard is shirat kfanim. So he left over the vineyard. He left over the vines for the grapes. V'chein sh'ari ilanis, all other trees, if it has only one type of tree, so he says chutz min ho'ilanis, so understood that it means that type of tree. Hoyibok fanim ut kolons. If there was only one type of ilanis, so whichever it was, we say that was the one that he was sheared. Masha'enken, if there was kfanim and kolim, so on one hand, since kolam mecher ba'ayin yofim mecher, we assume that he wasn't mishayir everything. He was only mishayir one of the species. And lepeil kfanim is more chashiv than kolim. So therefore we assume that he left the kfanim for himself, and that kolim was part of the sale. So again, misad the kolam mecher ba'ayin yofim mecher, he's not keeping everything for himself. But on the other hand, since kfanim are far more chashiv, so we assume that the kfanim is left for himself. That's his din. Hoyibo kfanim ut kolim. So we assume lishira la kfanim, he left the kfanim for himself. Now ilonis ukfanim, there were ilonis ukfanim, and lepel he said that he's being mishayir except for the ilonis. So we say lishir eli ilonis. Why? Because a geffen is not really so much an elon. He said chutz min ilonis. So even though a geffen is called an elon, but it's not really called an elon as much as a regular elon is called an elon. So even though a geffen is more chashiv, could be than another elon, but since that's the pashtus attach of the elon, we assume he was mishayir the elonis. V'chein elonis ut kolim. If there's elonis ut kolim, is again a dekel is not as much called a regular elon like other elonis, and therefore we assume that shir elonis he was mishayir the elonis, and the kolim was given away. Shahamecher ba'ayin yafu mecher. We always say that mecher is ba'ayin yafu mecher. So therefore, we don't assume that he gave everything away. We don't assume he gave everything away. That he left everything for himself, because mecher ba'ayin yafu mecher. So therefore, we don't assume he left everything for himself. But on the other end, he said that he's leaving the ilanis for himself. So therefore, we assume that he kept the ilanis. The imat kolim shir, and if he said that he's leaving over the kolim, so the question is, how tall does it have to be in order to be called a dekel? So then he says, lishir ela kol dekel goveya she'edin lebechevel. To say, when a person says, I'm leaving over the kolim, in order for a dekel to be called a dekel, when it's still very low, it's not really called a dekel. When it's tall enough that you have to go up with a rope in order to get up to take the dates, that's called a dekel. Imat kolim shir lishir ela kol dekel goveya she'edin lebechevel. Avavashar, any other dekel, which is smaller than that, is hareo sholikel. So when he says he's leaving over the tkolim for himself, we assume he meant the tall tkolim. The im shara alonis hu shishir, when he leaves over shari alonis, is lishir bem el kol she'eno el kevshei. In order to be called an elon, it has to be an elon which is at least strong enough that if a ox is going with a yoke on it and it hits into this elon, so the elon won't fall over. In other words, if it's still so weak that if the behemoth hits it with its yoke, the whole tree will topple over. So then it's not really elon. Masha'enkin, once it's strong enough that the oil is not koivshay, that's called an elon. And when he says chutz min elonis, in other words, he's retaining the elonis for himself. So it meant those elonis, not the weak elonis, but it means the elonis which are strong enough that the oil is not koivshay. Nachamol v'im. Sha'ar ilonis hu shishir, he left over other ilonis. So then lishir ella kol she'ino el kevshei. Only ilonis which cannot be knocked over, cannot be uprooted through a behemoth with a yoke going into it. The chol she'el kevshei, any type of tree which through being hit with the oil it would fall over is hareo sholiker. That's not called the ilonis, and therefore bechlal hasod nechshav. it's considered part of the field. Halacha Yud Gimel. Ha'imel lechavere karka u'dekolim ani mecher lecha. Person says, I'm selling you karka and dekolim. Now, lepel, there was no dekolim in this karka. So the question is, the lekeach wants to have charata on the sale. He says, you told me karka u'dekolim ani mecher lecha, and lepel, there's no dekolim. So the question, here, the din is that the moicher could provide him dekolim, not on this karka. He didn't say karka, which has dekolim. He says karka u'dekolim ani mecher lecha. So if the moicher wants to do good on the sale and make sure that the lekech shouldn't have a right to say mekach tois, so therefore he has to provide him the kolim. That's this din. There was no kolim. The moicher didn't own any kolim, and there was no kolim in this karka. He'll go ahead and buy for this buyer. The seller will buy for the buyer shneit kolim. Is a reza nikna mekach. So the mekach is a good mekach. Because he never said karka sheyesh bit kolim. He just said karka ut kolim. However, v'im amar karka bid kolim ani meichel lecha. I'm telling you karka bid kolim. Is im hoye b'shneit kolim if there was two kolim in the karka is kolim. V'im lav mekach tois uvechezek because he says karka bid kolim. V'im amar le karka shelt kolim ani meichel lecha. If he didn't tell him karka bid kolim, he told him karka shelt kolim. Is einlit kolim shein b'loshn hazeh el karka haroilit kolim. So when he says karka shelt kolim, it doesn't really mean that he has to give him to kolim. All he has to do is give him a karka which is roy to make kolim. If he says karka vit kolim, all he has to do is provide him karka plus kolim. Masha'enkin, if he says karka bit a karka bit kolim, so then he has to provide him a karka which has the kolim in him. That's the three lashenas: karka ut kolim, karka bit kolim, and karka shelt kolim. Halacha Yudalit. Amecha pardes lechaveri. Someone sells someone an orchard. Tzarech sheyichtiv leknei lechad kolim. You're buying the date tree, the palm tree, and also which includes all the branches of the tree, and also tamarim and the dates of the tree, and v'hutzim and all the other shoots that come out of the tree. V'aval pi shekanu kolei v'aval pi shelei pi reshesim. In reality, lepel, if he's buying this pardes and this pardes has the kolim, so the pashtus he's buying everything that's on the decal. But nevertheless, noy ashtarim. That's the niceness of the shtar, that the shtar should be specified, should write the proteus, all the things that is buying. Person sells someone a piece of karka, is sarich lichtiv leveli nachti lefane b'mecher zeklum. In other words, I'm selling to you completely and I'm not holding back anything. There's no like hidden things that I own in this karka. In order that there shouldn't be a place for dinitera and v'hatainis, you shouldn't taina that maybe this part of the karka he didn't sell or did sell. So Mele, if he writes basically he's saying it's a complete sale, and Mele, I have no tainus in the sale. Everything that's pastus included in the sale is included. Halacha tezvov hamecher bayis lechaveri. Someone sells someone a house. Is afal pisha kosev levi knesi lechi omke verumei. I sold you the depth of the house and also the height of the house. Of tzorech lichtiv le knei lecha mikarka tehem ad ruma rakia. In order to make it clear that he's selling him everything, there's also those things that a person has a house, and on top of the house there could be an area on top of the house which is also used, let's say between the ceiling and the roof, there could be an area which is being used, or an upper floor. Now that is that there could be a basement under the house, and other things that are under the house which are used. Now the question is that also part of the sale? So when a person just says, Omke verume, so that's not part of the sale. Omke verume means only that all the airspace that's on top of the house and all the airspace which is under the house is all yours. And therefore, if I want to use that airspace, I can't use that airspace. I can't go ahead and start building on top of your house. And I can't go ahead and build under your house, build a vault under your house. Masha'inkin, if I already own something which is on top of this house, or in other words, I have some building on top of this house, or I have some building under this house, so that's not really part of the sale, even though I said Omke Verumi. In order for that to be part of the sale, I have to say Knei Lecha Mikarka Tehem Ad Rumarikia. That's this deal. Let's read again. Hamecher Bayis Lechaveda Aval Pishe Kosovle Fi Knesi Lecha Omke Verumi. In order for it to be koina everything, Tzarech Lichtiv Le Knei Lecha Mikarka Tehem Ad Rumarikia. Why? Shaha Oimik Vaharum. If I said just Umke Verume, Eine Nikne Bestam is not going to be Nikne Bestam everything else. And kiven shekana ha'enik v'rum, kana harum shu aver bulvad, and v'ha'enik shu avi ha'aretz. Because when a person just says hiknesi l'cha omke v'rumei, it doesn't mean that he has everything that's built on top of the house or everything that's built under the house. All it means is that the airspace above the house and the airspace under the house is his. Avalei kana habinyonis, it says beinis, it should be binyonis, habinyonim shibmamakim shib'aver, any building that's over the house, or anything that's built over the house, or anything that's built under the house, so that wouldn't be the buyers. In other words, what the buyers only own, by saying Amka Rume means he's owning the airspace, but it doesn't mean he's owning those things that were built under the house and on top of the house. However, when he specifies clearly Mikar Katei Madrum Arakia, so then it's Kon Haber, Mahadus Shabavia Karka, under the Karka, there's cisterns or whatever, there's things that he has in the Uvia Karka, so that's also part of the sale. And also Vamazevis, Vamechila, Shabena Mazevis Lamaila. So in other words, the ceilings and any areas which are between the ceilings and the roof, all those areas, the mechilas, which are areas that were, let's see, in between the ceiling and the roof, that's all belongs to the buyer by saying that mikar katei madruma rikia. Masha'inkin, if he just says amke v'rume, he only owns the airspace, but he doesn't own those places that were built. Halacha tezayin, hamoicher bayis lechaveri, and it's clearly I want to retain the upper floor. I'll sell you the house, but the upper floor is going to be mine. So the din is arezu shalei. So the upper floor still belongs to the seller. The imrotzu lehesi bozizin, and if he wants to put out like beams going out of the upper floor to extend to make like a balcony, is meitzi. V'im nofla, and if the upper floor falls, is chayzer ubeina. You say he could rebuild the upper floor. V'imrotzu livnis al gaba, and if he wants to build on top of the upper floor, he could only build as much as it was built earlier. In other words, you can't go ahead and build a higher building than it was there originally. You could build whatever was there originally. In other words, he retained the upper floor, whatever fell, so he could rebuild it to what it was originally. He can't go ahead and build, let's say, if there was only a second floor, he can't build a third floor on top of it. And even the second floor, he can't build it, that it should be higher than the original second floor. He could build whatever it was originally. Halacha Yudzai. Hamoicher kivre. A person sells his kever. A person, let's say, Yarshin, there's a family plot, and he Yarshins, and he owns a kever there, and he sold the kever. A derech kivre, or the way to get to a kever. A mekei mamode, or it's like a family area, which is a mokim of maimed, where they come from the Beis HaKvaris, it's a mokim of maimed, and or a Beis HaSpeidim, or a place to make a speidim, and this was like a family area, an area which belonged to the family, and there's a place for the kvarim, a place for the maimed, a place for the hesped, and now this person, which is a yoirish, goes ahead and sells his portion, his kever, or his mokim maimed, so that he's selling his area. So the din is, boyin b'nei mishpacha, so the people of the family could come, v'koivrim shambal karche, even though someone else bought, it was like a good sale, but lepel, the family could go and insist that someone should be buried in this area, a person of the family, or the person himself that made the sale, should be buried in that area even though it was sold. Why? Mishum p'gam mishpacha, because lepel, the mishpacha has this area, and he went ahead, einochanami, technically he's the yoirish, so therefore he's allowed to sell it on the ownership, but on the other end, since it's lepel, it's part of the family, and lepel, by doing this, it's a gam to the mishpacha, that part of their family plot, so to speak, or their area where they have for all these inyanim should be sold, so therefore they can insist to take it back and move it. Whereas they're going ahead and burying someone in this area which they can't bought, so they have to pay for that area. Normally you can't force someone to sell you something, but over here you could force someone to give it to you. In other words, you could go ahead and bury this person, shalei b'ratzon of the rightful owner, but on the other end he has to be paid. Even though there was no specification about doing this, but nevertheless, since lepel, this is mitzat p'kam mishpacha, so the Chazal were misakin that they're allowed to do this.